You notice it late at night. A quiet unease. The sense that something about modern relationships doesn't add up. You meet women who are intelligent, socially fluent, and confident. They've lived fully, traveled, dated, chosen freely. And yet, beneath the polished surface, there is often restlessness, guardedness, a fatigue that doesn't match their age. No one warned you about this tension. Not in school, not in movies, not in the slogans of empowerment. You're told that freedom has no cost, that experience compounds like interest, that time is irrelevant. But biologically, time is never irrelevant. What you are witnessing is not individual failure. It is collision, ancient instincts crashing into the modern condition. And the reason it feels more pronounced after 30 is because biology keeps a harsher calendar than culture. In this video, we will dissect what is rarely spoken aloud, not to condemn, not to moralize, but to understand. We will look at mating behavior stripped of romance, at desire without narrative, at why certain truths surface only when options begin to narrow. This is not about hating women. It is about confronting reality without anesthesia. To understand the present, you must first abandon modern language. Our ancestors did not speak of dating. They spoke in outcomes: survival, reproduction, continuity. From an evolutionary perspective, men and women faced asymmetrical risks. A man could reproduce with minimal biological cost. A woman bore pregnancy, vulnerability, and dependency. This asymmetry shaped strategy. Female sexuality evolved to be selective, but also adaptive. When conditions were uncertain, mating with high-status or genetically desirable males increased offspring survival. This is not ideology. It is biological imperative. Hypergamy is not a slur. It is a pattern observed across cultures and centuries. The drive to mate upward in status, security, or competence. In ancestral environments, this strategy was efficient and short-term. Lifespan was brief. Communities were small. Pair bonds formed early because time demanded it. Promiscuity, when it appeared, was not a lifestyle. It was situational, a response to instability, abundance, or power concentration. But biology has not updated its software. The same instincts that once operated within tight constraints now operate in a world of infinite options and delayed consequences. The shadow self emerges here. The part of the psyche that seeks novelty, validation, and dominance, often unconsciously. And when culture rewards the shadow through attention, status, and affirmation, the behavior intensifies. There is no villain in this story, only drives older than language, playing out in a world they were never designed for. The tragedy is not desire. The tragedy is pretending desire has no cost. And that cost, eventually, always comes due. Biology evolved in villages. The modern world is a casino. Dating apps did not create desire. They weaponized it. In ancestral environments, choice was constrained by proximity, reputation, and consequence. Today, choice is abstract, infinite, disembodied. A face, a swipe, a dopamine spike. This is where instinct begins to malfunction. The female mating strategy, once calibrated for scarcity, now operates under perceived abundance. Attention is mistaken for value. Validation is confused with security. Social media amplifies this distortion. It creates a false hierarchy where visibility replaces virtue and novelty replaces depth. The algorithm does not reward pair bonding. It rewards arousal. This is dark psychology at scale. The system exploits the shadow self, especially the need to be chosen, admired, and desired, while delaying the feedback that once kept behavior in balance. No village remembers. No lineage watches. No immediate cost is felt. Until later, corporate life compounds the illusion. Status without intimacy. Independence without attachment. A life optimized for performance, not continuity. And so the instinct runs unchecked. Experience accumulates, but trust erodes. Pair bonding becomes harder, not because of morality, but because the nervous system adapts to constant novelty. By the time biology begins to close its window, the psyche has already been trained for motion, not stillness, for selection, not surrender. This is the modern trap. Ancient drives, artificial abundance, delayed consequences, and the most dangerous lies are the ones that work right up until they don't. Here is the truth, stated without cruelty. Biology does not negotiate with ideology. Time does not care about narratives. And the psyche always keeps score. What is rarely said is this: patterns that feel empowering in your 20s can quietly hollow you out by your 30s. Not because of punishment, but because repetition reshapes the nervous system. Desire trained on novelty struggles with permanence. Validation pursued externally weakens internal authority. And when the window of choice begins to narrow, anxiety replaces abundance. This is not unique to women. But the consequences are asymmetrical because biology is asymmetrical. The Stoics understood this long before dating apps. They warned that freedom without discipline becomes slavery to impulse, that chasing pleasure without restraint erodes character, and that wisdom is the ability to choose long-term meaning over short-term stimulation. The red pill is not anger. It is sobriety. Do not hate the instinct. Master it. Choose partners and a life, not based on endless option, but on alignment of values, character, and trajectory. Build yourself into someone who is chosen deliberately, not impulsively. And never outsource your sense of worth to attention. Because in the end, the most dangerous trap is not desire. It is confusing motion for progress. And the psyche, once fractured, is far harder to bind than any broken promise. Understanding a pattern is not the same as being enslaved by it. This is where most people fail. They consume insight as entertainment, not as a call to self-confrontation. Jung warned that what you do not make conscious will rule you as fate. This applies to desire, to attraction, to the silent scripts running beneath your choices. The mature response is not resentment. It is responsibility. For men, do not confuse access with intimacy. A culture that offers abundance tests your ability to choose restraint. Your task is not conquest, but discernment. Build value slowly. Select carefully. Refuse to bond with chaos and then complain about instability. For women, do not confuse attention with commitment. The marketplace flatters first and abandons later. Your power is not in how many desire you, but in who you allow close once desire fades. For both, integrate the shadow. Acknowledge the hunger for novelty without letting it dictate your life. Discipline is not repression. It is alignment. The ancient world understood something the modern one forgets. A good life is structured, not free in all directions, but oriented toward meaning. Because when instinct is left unchecked, it does not liberate, it consumes. And the final irony is this: those who delay wisdom for pleasure often spend the second half of life searching for what restraint would have preserved. Choose early, choose consciously, or be chosen later by consequences. There is one last truth, the kind that only becomes visible in hindsight. Modern culture teaches you to ask, what feels good now? Ancient wisdom asked a different question. Who will I become if I continue? Most people never ask it. They drift. They drift. From relationship to relationship. From stimulation to stimulation. Assuming identity will assemble itself automatically. It does not. Character is forged through constraint, through sacrifice, through the deliberate narrowing of options in service of something higher. When promiscuity, of body or of attention, becomes a substitute for meaning, the psyche fragments, trust erodes, and intimacy begins to feel unsafe, even when it is desired. This is the final cost no one advertises. Not loneliness, but the inability to rest inside another human being without suspicion or fear. The Stoics called this inner disorder. Jung called it possession by the unconscious. Today, we call it bad luck in relationships. It is not luck. It is pattern. And patterns, once entrenched, are ruthless teachers. So understand this clearly. Freedom without wisdom is not liberation. It is delay. delay of maturity, delay of meaning, delay of peace. The people who win are not the ones who experience everything, but the ones who choose carefully, early enough, and with eyes open. Because in the end, life does not ask what you wanted. It asks what you built, and it collects payment, not in guilt, but in consequences. There is an archetype older than any ideology: the mature man, the integrated woman, not perfect, not pure, but conscious. They understand something the modern world resists. That desire is a force, not a guide. That impulse speaks loudly, but wisdom whispers. Maturity is not the absence of hunger. It is the ability to delay gratification without resentment, to choose depth over novelty, to tolerate boredom long enough for meaning to emerge. Most people never reach this stage. They remain psychologically adolescent, seeking excitement, avoiding responsibility, blaming circumstance. But those who do awaken step out of the marketplace mindset entirely. They stop asking, "What can I get?" and start asking, "What is worth giving myself to?" This is where power actually lives. Not in leverage, not in options, but in orientation. When you align your instincts with a long-term aim, the chaos quiets, the shadow integrates, and relationships stop feeling like negotiations and start feeling like refuge. This is the final distinction. The undisciplined chase experience. The wise cultivate continuity. One burns fast. The other builds something that endures. And in a world addicted to immediacy, the rarest and most dangerous person is the one who can wait. After all analysis, there is silence. And silence is where truth settles. No outrage, no moral victory, just the weight of understanding. When illusions collapse, something uncomfortable remains. Choice. You cannot unknow what you now see. You cannot return to innocence, only to responsibility. The modern world will continue to sell distraction as freedom and appetite as identity. It will reward impulse loudly and punish foresight quietly. Do not expect applause for discipline. Do not expect validation for restraint. The reward is subtler. Clarity, stability, the ability to sit alone without craving escape. This is how civilizations were built. This is how families endured. This is how meaning survived chaos. Not through indulgence, but through voluntary limitation. So when the noise fades and the crowd rushes elsewhere, remember this. Those who master themselves do not need to dominate others. Those who choose depth do not fear time. And those who accept reality early are spared from learning it late. That is the final lesson. Not shocking, not viral, but true. And truth, once seen, does not need to shout. There is a quiet phase no one posts about. It arrives after the noise, after the stories, after the certainty that there will always be more time. This is the phase where patterns reveal their final shape. People begin to speak differently, less about adventure, more about exhaustion. They say, "Everyone is broken." They say, "I just keep meeting the wrong people." They say, "It shouldn't be this hard." But difficulty is not random. It is cumulative. Unexamined choices do not disappear. They fossilize into temperament, into mistrust, into emotional calluses mistaken for wisdom. The modern tragedy is not that people suffer. It is that they suffer without understanding why, and then build identities around the wound. Stoicism warned against this, not because pain is immoral, but because blindness to cause is fatal to growth. If you ignore the signal long enough, life stops whispering. It starts removing options, not as revenge, as correction. This is the final fork in the road. You can interpret discomfort as injustice and harden, or you can interpret it as feedback and mature. One path leads to bitterness dressed as independence. The other leads to limits chosen freely rather than imposed. The difference between the two is not intelligence. It is humility. And humility, paradoxically, is what allows a person to age without becoming small. This is where the lecture ends. What happens next is no longer theory. There is a moment, rare, uncomfortable, when a person stops blaming the world and turns inward without flinching. This is the reckoning, not with society, not with the opposite sex, but with one's own participation in illusion. Most people never reach this point. They defend their past choices as identity. They protect narrative over truth, because to admit error feels like annihilation. But the strongest individuals understand something brutal and liberating. You are not your past behavior. You are your capacity to correct course. This is where real power begins. When you no longer need lies to protect your self-image. When you stop outsourcing meaning to desire, validation, or resentment. When you accept limits, not as oppression but as structure. The ancient archetypes converge here. The Stoic accepts reality without complaint. The Jungian integrates the shadow without worshiping it. The evolved individual uses instinct as fuel, not as a steering wheel. This is what makes someone dangerous, not to others, but to falsehood. They cannot be easily manipulated. They do not chase approval. They do not confuse appetite with destiny. They choose deliberately. They bond carefully. They build slowly. And while the world continues spiraling toward excess, they move in the opposite direction, toward clarity, depth, and self-command. This is not a popular path. It never has been, but it is the path that leads somewhere. And in a culture addicted to distraction, the rarest form of rebellion is not indulgence. It is mastery.